Canada's $20 billion battery deal with Volkswagen came with a clause that's barely made headlines: total exclusion of US suppliers. This wasn't a demand from Berlin, it was written directly into the contract by Ontario's government. American automakers wanted in. But the agreement called for 100% Canadian supply chain. No Michigan steel, no Ohio components, no exceptions. Why would Ontario insist on something this drastic? It's not just about business. After years of tariff threats and unpredictable US trade moves, Ottawa and Queen's Park saw an opening. By locking out US partners and tying the plant's output to Europe, Canada is using its resources and energy leverage to force a new kind of economic independence. And the St. Thomas plant is just the start of this shift. The St. Thomas gigafactory stands as a calculated move by Ontario to redraw the map of North America's auto industry. This isn't just another assembly line. Every battery built here is destined for Europe. No American parts, no cross-border mixing. That's not Volkswagen's demand, it's a requirement written by Ontario's government, enforced under Canada-EU trade terms, CETA, and strict EU battery quotas. US suppliers are locked out by design and the entire supply chain is Canadian from start to finish. The numbers show what's at stake. The factory itself brings more than 3,000 direct jobs. Tens of thousands more are expected in Ontario's mining and clean tech sectors. Nickel, lithium, and cobalt are all pulled from Ontario's north, refined in Sudbury, then shipped down to St. Thomas for battery production. There's no back and forth across the border, no splitting value with US plants. The old days of parts zigzagging between Michigan and Ontario are over. Now, value stays in Canada, and finished batteries head straight to European ports. Ontario's government didn't stop at policy. It put up $700 million in provincial grants, matched by $700 million from Ottawa, all locked in for 10 years. That's stability US automakers can't match. Their incentives could vanish after an election, or get tied up in court. For European investors, that's a guarantee that their supply chain won't get caught in political crossfire. The energy angle matters too. The plant runs on Ontario's grid, which is 60% nuclear, 25% hydro, and 15% renewables. That's cleaner and more reliable than anything in neighboring US states. Ohio and Pennsylvania pay about 30% more per kilowatt hour, and their grids can barely handle a heat wave. Ontario's grid doesn't buckle. The US still buys power from Ontario, but now Canada sets the price and the terms. The workforce is changing along with the industry. When Detroit-focused auto suppliers started laying off workers, Ontario moved fast. Retraining programs redirected those workers into new roles linked to the European market, not the US. It's a full reset. Ontario's talent pool now serves European automakers, and the province's economic future is tied to Europe, not Detroit. The St. Thomas Gigafactory is not an isolated project. Ontario is repeating this model with other European firms. The province offers a stable policy environment, clean energy, and a closed supply chain. US suppliers are left on the outside, watching as Ontario rewrites the rules. That shift didn't happen in a vacuum. It was a direct answer to years of US trade threats and unpredictable tariffs. Ontario's government decided to build leverage of its own, and European partners were ready to sign on. The next chapter's about what pushed Canada to make that break in the first place. Tariffs were supposed to bring Canada back to the table. Instead, they pushed Ontario out of the room. When the Trump administration doubled tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum to 50% in March 2025, it didn't just raise costs for manufacturers, it shattered decades of trust between the two countries. Ontario's government saw the writing on the wall. European companies, on the other hand, offered 10-year supply contracts and fixed pricing. Ontario's response was immediate. The province hit back with a 25% surcharge on electricity exports. That move raised wholesale costs by about $7 per megawatt hour, costing U.S. utilities an extra $300,000 to $400,000 every day. Premier Doug Ford called it self-defense. Suddenly, more than 1 million American homes and businesses faced higher bills and the threat of blackouts. Belgium's Umicore had a $1.5 billion battery plant planned for Ontario. After the US floated new auto tariffs, Umicore paused the project. Other European firms started to see the US and Canada as two very different markets. Canada was stable, the US was unpredictable. The new European supply contracts didn't just lock in Canadian content, they locked out US components entirely. Ontario's mining sector now sells lithium and cobalt to Canadian refiners. New York gets 20% of its power from Ontario. Michigan depends on it during peak demand. Meanwhile, Ontario's nuclear plants kept running. The imbalance was clear. Defense contracts started moving to Europe. Canada chose European drones and partnered with Germany on battery tech. European automakers noticed Ontario's energy advantage, too. Factories in Ontario run on 90% clean energy. Detroit used to set the pace for Ontario's auto sector. Now, it's Stuttgart making the calls. Ontario's strategy is about more than just weathering US trade moves. It's about building a foundation that attracts global investment. The province is selling stability, and European firms are lining up to buy. Ontario has locked in workforce development with companies like Volkswagen. These retraining programs aren't temporary. Energy is the pillar that holds up the rest. Ontario's electricity grid is 60% nuclear, 25% hydro, and 15% renewables. Utilities here pay about 30% less per kilowatt hour compared to Ohio or Pennsylvania. Norway's Morrow battery firm picked Ontario over Texas for a $1.2 billion plant. Dutch pension funds are bypassing US partners and putting their money straight into Ontario mining projects. German automakers aren't just opening assembly lines, they're building entire ecosystems. Take lithium. It's mined in northern Ontario, refined in Sudbury, and turned into battery cells in St. Thomas. The St. Thomas Volkswagen plant received a $700 million provincial grant, matched by another $700 million from Ottawa. That's a 10-year promise, something the US can't match, where EV credits can vanish with the next administration. Ontario's model is spreading. Other European firms are copying what Volkswagen started. Detroit used to set Ontario's schedule. Now, it's Stuttgart. The Volkswagen deal was only the start. Now, Dutch pension funds are backing Canadian mining, and Airbus is moving wing production to Quebec. European firms get a stable partner, and the US is left watching as Canada builds out entire supply chains with little American involvement. America's tariff gamble backfired. Canada answered with nuclear-powered factories, fixed tax incentives, and serious worker retraining. If Ontario cut power exports, Michigan and New York would face blackouts within days. The leverage has shifted. So here's the question. Can the US adapt, or is Canada's European pivot here to stay? Tell me what you think in the comments.